This is Jeremy Thompson. You might know him as a businessman, coach, or a hockey player, but to me, I know him as Dad. He is funny, caring, smart, and loving, but most importantly, he is the best dad a girl could ask for. He's done so many things for me, from coaching almost every sport to building sets in my theater performances. He's taught me many lessons in the 21 years that I've known him, one of them being to work hard not only for yourself, but especially for the people around you. I've seen him accomplish some amazing things, which is what this video is all about. This is the story of my dad. I remember my dad telling me stories about our family and where we come from at a young age, but I never really understood the extent of it all. I remember learning about Métis people in school and him coming to help me do a presentation in my grade 4 class about one of our ancestors. I always wanted to know more. He runs his own company, and I knew his main focus was working with different indigenous communities, yet I wanted to know more about how he got here and why. So, I sat down with him and asked him to tell me the stories about our family, but I really wanted to know more about him. He's told me stories in the past about not only the hardships he's had to face, but the ones his family has too. Hearing about this made me want to do this video on him and how he's turned one thing into many big accomplishments. This one's for you, Dad. I'm so proud of you, and even prouder to be your daughter. As far as family history goes, I didn't realize how interesting and amazing it all was. My dad has Métis heritage on both sides of his family, but on his paternal side, he also has First Nations family. On his mother's side, his grandpa Brigitte, my great-grandfather, comes from a long line of multi-generational Métis family going back to the Red River, back to fur traders coming over from Scotland. His second great-grandma Taylor was in Prince Albert during the Northwest Resistance, as well as her uncle being on Louis Riel's council. On his dad's side, one of his great-uncles was Malcolm Norris, who was one of the founding fathers of Métis Nation Alberta and a Métis advocate. His grandparents, Cecil and Edith, were also very big advocates for Indigenous rights. Cecil actually got the lawyer for Leonard Peltier when he was arrested in Calgary after he fled Wounded Knee. After learning all of this and hearing about the influences they've had in history, I couldn't wait to hear more about my dad and how he's made an impact. So here's a little bit more about him. My dad was born in the late 70s in Vernon, British Columbia. He grew up learning about his Métis heritage from his parents, but his main teacher was his grandmother, Edith. The work that she did when he was young by starting native alcohol services and helping people with addictions, he and his brothers often traveled and did things with her. One of his first memories being when his grandmother would take them to powwows and being very involved with ceremonies, learning the fact that they were both Métis and First Nations. Even though they didn't look like most of their family, they were taught that that's who they were and were always told stories of their family and traditions. My dad grew up playing multiple sports, but found himself more engaged playing hockey. Playing in native hockey and baseball tournaments, he really became engaged in the community, even winning Métis Youth Role Model in Alberta at the age of 16. My dad talked about so many of his memories from growing up Métis, but his favorite will always be getting together with all of his family. As my dad talked to me about his experience in the community, we started talking about the difficult topic of racism. My dad said that once people knew that they were native, they started to get the odd comments and questionable faces. He remembers when he was young playing in a hockey tournament with some of his cousins, people coming up to him asking him why he was playing with them. Another incident was when he was playing in a hockey tournament and the cop showed up to the hotel, then proceeded to tell my dad that he shouldn't be with these people. Playing hockey, there were always comments made, guys calling him names, and sometimes coaches saying things that wouldn't be tolerated today. When he played for the Tri-City Americans, he and another one of his teammates, Craig Stahl, were known as the Indian Outlaws. At the time, they owned it and didn't mind it, but today it would be unacceptable. It became an identity. He told me that a lot of times, especially with other Native players he played with, they ended up fighting not because they wanted to, but that's how they dealt with it, and because they were good at it, it became expected. There were lots of times where he faced racism and didn't face it, and growing up when he did, there are a lot of things he tolerated that would never be tolerated today, but he emphasized on the role models he had growing up who didn't tolerate disrespect. His parents and grandparents were huge influences on how he saw the world, specifically his grandmother and how she always had her door open to anyone, as well as his grandfather, who was a residential school survivor. The fact that he didn't let that trauma affect his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren is something very important to my dad, as well as me. One of the things I'm most proud of when it comes to my dad is his business. He's been a businessman for as long as I can remember. Some of my earliest memories I have are answering phone calls while my dad was off doing something else. He was a very busy guy, yet always found the time to coach my brothers and I in almost every sport and be there for us when we needed it most. I really wanted to know where everything started, where he got all of these ideas for his business now. This is one of the most important parts of the story to me. It all kind of started when we moved back to Canada from the United States in the early 2000s. He was getting more involved in Métis Nations again, being a part of some employment and training centers, and when he had his first business at Lubex, he won the Entrepreneurship Award for Métis Nation, as well as the award for Best Indigenous Business in Medicine Hat, with one of the goals being to employ as many Indigenous people he could in the community. When he moved to Calgary in the early 2010s, he found himself not being as involved as he wanted to be. He was always occupied, working downtown all the time, and he knew he could be doing other things to make him happy. And he did that with his company, Eagle Spirit. About a month into his business is when the graves were found at the Kamloops Residential School. This was an eye-opener, and after that he really started focusing on the Indigenous relations aspect of his business. Today, 80% of his business has been Indigenous relations, and he feels very lucky to have people coming to him asking for advice, Indigenous or not. He's loved getting to know and meet chiefs from different nations and attending chiefs meetings and different conferences. The key focus of his business now is economic reconciliation. The fact that with the companies he's working with, they're not only creating economic opportunities on and off the reserve for Indigenous people, but also setting a path for careers. He hopes that one of the end goals of his company would be that the people he's worked with to one day hopefully develop their own business and companies on or off the reserve. Really working with technology as well, training and employing Indigenous people, creating a workforce that would be underutilized in those industries. He did a big project with a company this year where they trained 23 people and got them certified to be quality assurance code testers, testing software before it's released. They successfully got 80% of them hired on with big tech companies. Some of the challenges have been working with the right companies and making sure that they want to make a difference and are committed to reconciliation. But he's done a lot of hard work to make sure that he's working with the right people. A lot of it is realizing there's a long way to go in reconciliation. He is so passionate about the work he does. He wants the best for everyone and is willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that they are happy and they get the life that they deserve. Whether that be as a dad, coach, coworker, or boss. The fact that he can be a positive role model for his kids, family, friends, Indigenous and non-Indigenous people is what truly speaks to him. And he's right. He has been one of my biggest role models. He really is the best dad in the world. I'm so honored to be his daughter, and I couldn't be any prouder of him. I'm so thankful for everything he's done for me. You're one of my biggest inspirations and role models, Dad. I'm so lucky to have you in my life.